Hello, and welcome to Fraud Talks. My name is Gareth Evans. I'm the head of fraud with financial crime practice at Sionic. For those of you who don't know, Sionic, we're a specialist consulting organization based in the UK, Europe, and the United States. We work with many of the world's leading banks and financial services organizations. This is the first in a series of fraud talks where I'll be discussing the challenges we face in fraud prevention with invited guests from across the industry. If you'd like to attend any of the other talks in this series, the registration links are available on the Sionic website. Today's topic focuses on behavioural profiling, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Asaf Yacobi from behavioural profiling specialist Bugaroo. Asaf is a solutions architect director at Bugaroo. He has over a decade's experience working with market-leading financial crime prevention vendors, including IBM Trustea and NICE Actimize, covering different roles from R&D to professional services and pre-sales. Today's session is recorded for internal audit and quality purposes. Asaf, welcome. I would like to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi Garrett, pleasure to be here. All right, I'll introduce myself, as you said, briefly, because you already did that for me. So yeah, I think I've been around financial crime prevention business for probably last 15 years or so. Never stopped to think about it. And as you said, previously with IBM Trustea, before that with NICE Actimize, combination of different roles, starting from R&D, as you said, to professional services, so the guy that implement the stuff, some leadership roles there, and then straight into pre-sales, solution consultancy, solution architect, things like that. Started my financial crime journey actually with AML, now focusing more on fraud prevention in recent years. And that's it. Being with Bugaroo for quite a while now, as hopefully you can see somewhere there. We are kind of the online or preventing online banking frauds, mostly banking, not necessarily nowadays. I think our kind of major kind of focus area is behavioral biometrics. Indeed, that's I think why you invited me here to join.
Yes.
But we do some other stuff as well, and you can see it there. But I guess we can get to that with the content of the when we progress with the content of this webinar.
Okay, perfect. So let's go straight into it. Behavioral profiling. What's the difference between behavioral profiling and traditional fraud techniques?
All right. So, behavioral profiling, at least to me, and at least in our context, I guess if you ask, physiologist or something, in the academia, they have different definition. In our context of the financial crime prevention, it's really about the way a user is, behaves through as he navigates through the application, right? And more specifically, the way they interact with their devices, right? And it could be things around, so if you wanted to type Garrett and you need to capitalize the G, so you could do it with a left shift as opposed to right shift. Or, you could use when you navigate for your smartphone, you could do it, with your, left hand because you are left-handed like myself. Or you could do it with your right hand. It's like 90% of the population. And there you can think about different, amount of pressure that you would, put on the screen, the thickness of your thumb, things like that. And so that's kind of will be one aspect to that. The other will be the way that you navigate or your patterns, right? So, you would, if you are like myself, so, you will probably, and again, I think most of us people in fraud prevention business, we have this habit of checking our bank account every morning just to see everything is there. And we were the recent victim, because it will be a bit embarrassing, but so you will kind of log in and then you will just go and check your balance, right? Other people might have different things, that's different kind of rhythm or different, navigation through the app that they will take. And there are also patterns there. I would do it usually at, between 6 to 7 a.m. because my young child woke me up and I have nothing better to do. Others are lucky enough to wake up at 9, and then that they will have it with their morning coffee. I already had 3 by that time. It will also probably it will also probably affect the, the level or the rapidness that I will do when I will log in. So things like that. It's navigation analysis, but also, as I said, the way that you interact with your devices. Now, if we want to compare it to kind of more traditional, I would say, fraud prevention techniques, I think those traditional models were kind of evolved more from the AML side of things. And to that end, basically, they try to apply some rules over certain data sets, right? And that's I guess why we call it transactional monitoring.
Yeah.
And there are several differences there, right? I mean, with kind of behavioral analytics, and again, behavioral analytics is just one thing. Think about analytics or kind of profiling for every kind of entity that is involved, right? It could be the computer that I'm currently using. It could be a mobile that I might use. It could be the network that I usually come from when I log into my bank. Maybe it's mobile, maybe it's in previous months, it was all about my home network, but it wasn't the case before that. I used to travel every week, right? So I was very hard kind of to maintain profile on, and that's changed. So all of that information, it's kind of, everything that you can get from the online channel, really, is information that I think historically transactional monitoring solution wouldn't have. And if they would, it means they got it from a different kind of provider, right? Because they will look at the transactional information. And there are other differences. I think largely speaking, transactional monitoring solutions are on-prem as opposed to online channel providers or data like Bugaroo, which is mostly SaaS solution. Solution like ours should, they have to be real time, because they need, if you think about, faster payments in the UK and equivalent in other territories, you don't have a lot of time to make a call, as opposed to AML where you had, the night really, right?
Yeah.
So you could execute everything in a batch overnight. And I think that's it.
Okay. Okay, good. Look, it's we've just got into July. Can't believe how quick this year's gone. Yeah. It's been an interesting year to say the least, and we can't really have a discussion about anything in 2020 without talking about COVID-19 and what's happened in the industry. So, how's it been for you? How have you found it? How have your customers managed, and what impact has it had on fraud so far in 2020, and where is it going?
Yeah, well, you did manage to go on 10 minutes without speaking about COVID or Corona. So, cheers to that. What my personal belief is that, and my colleague Mateusz and myself had a complete webinar on COVID-19. In fact, it was 2 months ago. Things changed ever since, but it is available to watch if someone wants. Anyway, I think it's, the trend started way earlier, before COVID-19 was even a thing, before 2019 as well. And once we got kind of into this era, like the new normality, right, and all of that, so everything is, on steroids, if you will. And for many kind of reasons, right? I mean, fraudsters, like everyone else, are at home as well. And some countries, they are still at home. We are lucky enough to go past this phase, at least for now. So they are bored, and they need something to do. They also feel the economical pressure, right? They need, they're more motivated in order to do their kind of bad stuff. At the same time, people like, valid user or good people, right? And they had overnight to change their kind of behavior, right? Some people, again, people like yourself, like me, I wouldn't, I can't even imagine that, but there are people that would never use online channels, right? they never had, they said, okay, I will go to the branch, I will, take some money out, I will take some money, put some money in, I will print out a statement, things that, again, a lot of the world population, that's what they do. Those people, if they wanted to go on with their daily life, they needed to adapt, again, overnight to the new norm. And the problem is, we as kind of financial crime vendors, we didn't really have a lot of information of, what to expect. I mean, what is it? What is a kind of a standard or average behavior, everything that I just mentioned earlier, for people that never were online, right? So that was kind of something that we need to think of. And again, there were other unique things, I would say. I mean, most of us, as I said earlier, they have their routine. Right? You would wake up, you will check your balance, you will travel here, you travel there. You will use, your computer, your mobile. That's it, in order to access to a bank application. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, you are at home, right? You have a new computer. A computer that is not behind any kind of corporate, firewalls, VPN, maybe even antiviruses. They are a very low-hanging fruit, I would say, like a very easy target to attack. Right? You need to consider all of those things. I said I used to travel every week. So my bank, my profile, my behavioral profile, if you will, for my bank provider was, I travel all the time. You cannot really profile where it's going to be next. That doesn't happen anymore. I'm at home all the time. I mean, there were months that I wouldn't even leave my home, right? Now I could, go a bit around, but that's it. I mean, I don't travel internationally. I don't use any other computers. My mobile wasn't roaming for a few months. Obviously, we need to change my kind of profile. Yeah. Otherwise, you will face a lot of kind of, false positives and things that you obviously don't want to get in the, financial crime world, prevention world, I should say. So I guess, we were just seeing the same trends, as I said, that we usually see, just significantly more. There was some kind of, we call it, let's call it professionally, retuning phase. Yeah. And again, some of, if your fraud prevention world is based on rules, and sometimes they don't even update it automatically, you have a problem. You need to consider retuning, right? But if your solution is kind of machine learning based or artificial intelligence or deep learning or, any other buzzwords that you want me to use, you would expect this will take place automatically. Yeah, you would need to see some, new norm sessions because that's the nature of the beast. But you will get there very fast.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me with COVID is that it's been a big normalizer, a big leveler, because in our industry we tend to focus a lot on retail banking and sort of general public, but in actual fact you've had all sorts of businesses, all sorts of industry being affected by COVID, having to change the way they work because of the isolation element of it. And to be honest, in Sionic, we do work with the tier ones, the kind of the big banks out there, but also we have a large wealth and international business, asset management firms, smaller lower tier banks, and it's been a bit of a complaint by a lot of those guys for a long time, in that traditional fraud solutions are kind of designed for retail banks and then shoehorned into a wealth or private banking world. And typically those retail banks, they have a tolerance for false positives. They have a high volume of transactions of relatively low amounts to tune against. All of those sorts of functionality isn't really relevant for the wealth and private banking and asset management type companies. And the defense typically for those companies has always been the ability to call back customers and to have that human interaction with their customers on a more one-to-one basis, as opposed to relying on, say, an algorithm within a transaction monitoring solution. Whereas COVID has kind of forced that issue. So how does behavioral profiling affect something like that as opposed to a transaction monitoring?
So, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, right? I mean, yeah, traditionally retail banking would probably will be kind of the major, or what fraudster will target. And I think you would expect those things in more, as I said, if you think about the transactional monitoring solution. So again, you would expect different solutions, or sometimes just different models within when you think about retail banking as opposed to other stuff, let's say corporate banking, because it's not the same thing. I mean, retail banking is myself and my partner, we log into the same bank account and that's it. And we'll do our stuff, we'll look at the balance, we'll pay rent, we'll pay mortgage, whatever, and that's it. Corporate banking is different, right? Because there is always more than one individual. There is some kind of audits that needs to be taking place. There are levels of, for a single transaction, you might need 3 different people to log in and to approve, kind of to go through a flow or chain. Obviously, it is, you can't really have one model or one solution that will cater against all of those different attacks, or at least patterns. With a solution, we call those the traditional ones. So those will be the modern ones, but the behavioral online fraud prevention tools, all of those, obviously I'm representing Bugaroo here, but we are a part of an industry that is saturated with vendors, right? And for us, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I'll give you an idea. I mean, I mentioned corporate banking as opposed to retail banking, different solutions, different models. We have one solution for all of that. And it's not only for banking, right? Because we basically look at more of, as opposed to transactional data, it's more of a kind of metadata or session data, if you will. And that means that I'm actually looking at the way that you, specifically, Garrett, interacts with this application. Right. So what is the application? To be honest, I don't really care. I mean, I'm just looking for anomalies in the way that you usually interact with it. And that's it. And I think that once you take the discussion out of kind of the traditional way of things that look at rules and models and stuff, so again, it doesn't really matter. I mean, and I think that's what I usually, speak to my customers. And as we said, Bugaroo is not only about retail banking for sure, and it's not only about banking as well. And same solution was successful for any kind of those.
Okay.
Customers.
We do have a Q&A functionality on the Zoom webinar, so you can feel free to ask any questions of either myself or Asaf. I do notice we've had one question come through, so I'm going to leave my questions and jump to that one very quickly.
Right.
I already have a transaction monitoring solution. Do I need behavioral profiling solution as well? Is this a replacement or an addition to?
It's a good one. Well, to me, certainly it's not a replacement. And I would just say that, from Bugaroo perspective, at least, speaking, for what I know best. So we have good relationship with all of those kind of traditional providers, right? We don't see them as competition, and then don't see us as competitive solution, but rather as a complementing solution. Why is that? And, I think Gartner were the first to do that. When was it? 7-8 years ago, they spoke about 5 layers of fraud prevention, right? So we don't really use that anymore, but the concept remains. I mean, it's a very valid one. If you want to protect something, your crown jewels, you wouldn't have only 1 layer of defense. You will have more than 1. They went to 5. Maybe nowadays you can use 2 or 3 vendors to cover all 5, but still you need those vendors. I think a typical problem for those transactional monitoring solution. And I think the reason is because I said they missed some information. We spoke quite a lot about behavioral profiling, but there will be also information around, malware. So a transactional monitoring tool needs someone to tell him there is, or to tell it there is malware there, or there was malware in the session. And they also need someone to point it out to them that, this device is a new device for this specific user, as opposed to a device that's been seen in the past 10 times. And, and this specific new device is rooted or jailbroken and is currently, in a unsecure Wi-Fi, or is roaming at all, things like that. And if you don't have this information, you will end up with a lot of false positives. And no one in our industry, when they look at alert management systems, application, they don't really want to see false positives, because at some point you will lose trust of them. I think integrating solution like ours into the traditional transactional monitoring solutions is the way to reduce false positives significantly, allowing you or the fraud analyst to focus on the real problems.
Okay, so one of my bugbears, having worked in fraud prevention, both at the banks and at the vendors, is I always feel as if we are playing defense. We're always there trying to stop the attacks. So the fraudsters all day are attacking our customers, and all we're doing is stopping the attacks coming towards us. And I've always felt that the silver bullet almost is being able to take those attacks back. We will go from defense onto offense and start going back to the fraudster and trying to get convictions. I mean, there have been some high-profile convictions recently. There was one in the paper the other day where I think it was 40 million in cash and a Lamborghini was sort of picked up from one of the big organizations. But it does seem as if the ability to get convictions and to stop the fraudsters is a small percentage of the work we actually do. The vast majority of what we do is just stopping and very defensive. How do you see behavioral profiling as a tool to go on the offense and actually try and identify fraudsters and not just stop attacks?
Well, you keep saying, offensive and defensive, and I was only thinking about this rugby shirt behind you. But, anyway, you know what? I think if that's what you feel about those fraud prevention tools, so you might want to consider the fraud prevention tool that you're using. Because, I can just give you an example, right? And from, a solution that we have, the name of it is Fraudster Hunter. This is basically a visual link analysis tool, VLA, right? And it helps you to kind of unhide different kind of hidden relations or relationships between different entities. And the entities being everything that you would expect, the computer or the device, the network that you're coming from, your own behavioral profile, and also obviously the fraudster profile. Now, people can use that, to basically say, okay, I see a lot of suspicious activity coming from a certain device, a certain IP range, a certain IP address. And then once you see the next one, you say, okay, I know this guy, or I know this network, or I know this device, right? And you can also use that for, to look for kind of mule accounts, right? Yeah. And that's a lot of our customers, that's exactly what they're using, these kind of tools. Because that's one thing to understand, there was a fraud kind of attack on your infrastructure or application, whatever. But then, okay, where are the problems then? So I've seen that, and now I want to go back and to look and to find all the affected accounts, even if it happened 3 days ago, and maybe my transaction monitoring tool missed that, because there is no such thing on 100% success rate in our business, sadly.
Yeah.
So having all this information in a kind of graphical tool that also actually does that for you and will help you to identify those, again, as I said, in hidden relationships. So that's probably the way to go. And as I keep saying, I mean, if we keep profiling profiles for all, behavioral and others, every kind of valid users, just to understand what is their normality and what is not, and what is an anomaly, and basically where are the fraudulent activities, there is nothing that stops us to do the same for fraudsters, right? So if we'll see, Bugaroo, I didn't mention it, but we have, we are a relatively small company, right? But we have dozens of customers worldwide. And, most of those fraudsters nowadays, they would operate kind of in gangs, right? They will sit in a room. Even there is a lockdown, they don't care, surprisingly. And you will see a lot of kind of traffic coming from the same locations, the same computers, the same IP ranges all the time, right? And you'll see spikes, you see different activities. Now, you see that in one specific have kind of a profile for this specific fraudster or this specific gang, and you can apply it then on, and obviously anonymized and everything on other financial institutions. So, we're basically using our capabilities to look for anomalies for, valid users, and, what they are doing now comparing to what we expect them to do, but we would do the same for fraudsters, and we'll be basically one step ahead of them.
Okay. We've got another question on the Q&A. Can your solution detect social engineering voice scams?
Social engineering voice scams. And I mean, our solution is not really dedicated in voice, right? Where we will kind of meet it is where in the, so obviously not in the point of infection, but, when you do that, I mean, where you, people just don't call you just for the sake of it. They want you to do something, right? Yeah. So that they will instruct you to do. And it's kind of a version of the CEO fraud, or when someone sent an email and said, you know what, I'm your CEO. Well, not like that, right? But, coming from your CEO, please, you need to do it now. You need to transfer money. There is no time to go through all the standard fraud checks or security checks. Just do it right now. Obviously, that should raise a flag as it is. But, let's say you avoided it. And what behavioral solution tools will usually do is that, we can sense there is something which is not right there. I mean, because basically you are probably, when you do something where you always do, you will have your own rhythm, you will do the same thing, you will be relaxed, right? Yeah. And when someone is instructing you over the phone to do something and you don't really understand what they say, or you might have some level of suspicion that they are not who they say they are. So we will see you kind of, playing with the mouse. You will maybe draw circles on the screen. Something won't look right from kind of our perspective when we look at the behavioral analytics. So that's probably the way to go about that.
So you're really identifying the stress in the activity as opposed to the instruction of the activity, in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Got another question here. Let's have a look. The problem I always find with fraud solutions is they typically take time to build out a profile. I have a big issue with new account fraud. We have no history, therefore most fraud solutions don't work.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I agree. There is a problem with new account fraud if you compare them to, old account fraud, right? I mean, existing account fraud. I mean, and why is that? Because when there is a session that you've seen, or a user that you've seen active for many times, 5 times, 6 times, whatever, there is a lot of information that you can work with. There is a lot of data sets to base our analytics on, and essentially that's what we are doing, right? And it doesn't mean that with new account fraud there is nothing. There is a lot of other things that we can do. So all those profiles that I keep mentioning, and Bugaroo, for example, and I believe others as well, So we look at two things. We basically maintain profile for every individual user, but we also do the same for the population, right? So we segment all of kind of the users into everyone that comes our way or comes to the application into kind of good behavior segments, valid, naive users, and bad users, fraudsters, and people that have, bad intentions. And there are things that, and then we will consider that as kind of fraudulent activity or fraudulent behavior, which deemed suspicious. I'll give you some examples. There are things that doesn't make sense, right? I mean, I wouldn't use, I don't know, my computer if I wanted to use a mobile app of my bank, right? I will just pick up my phone, I will download this app and I'll use it. And then what happens if you see an access trying to do the same thing through an emulator on your device, on your computer? Does that make sense if you are not working for this bank QA or because you are, a fraudster? That's probably more likely. So that's kind of an example. Think about velocity. Think about, as I said earlier, myself, I use a computer, a mobile, that's it. I wouldn't have any other device in order to access my account.
Yeah.
But what happens if you see 5, 6 different devices accessing one single account? Or the other way, from one device, most of us have one bank bank account, right? Maybe 2. Right, let's leave ISA and all of that alone for now, aside. Now, what happens if you see from the single device, you see 5 different access to different kind of banking providers? So velocity, does that make sense? Probably not. So all of those things are kind of things that you can start with, even if you don't really know what a specific user will behave with a kind of a certain application. And there are stuff that you don't need any kind of learning. I mean, if you have malware, that's not a good indication, right? That's something that the bank will probably want to know. If you are using a proxy, if you are using VPN sometimes, right? It could be that you're logging into your kind of office network, which is fine, but at least it's something that we would like our customer to know. If it is changing, the connection changing throughout the session, that's a very strong indication something happened there, right? If you see that your session was hijacked, things like that, all of that, they don't really require any kind of learning, any tuning even. And also, it's probably good to find to use a vendor that doesn't require, too many sessions in order to maintain a good behavioral profile. So there are some differences there when you think about different vendors.
Okay, got some more questions as well. As a small provider, are you at a disadvantage to others in collecting profiles of suspicious devices? Is there an argument for there to be a small number of companies providing this service in order to have a global view of device activity?
It's a good question. I don't see that as a disadvantage or even if an advantage. I mean, I don't see how the relevancy, if you will, to the size of the organization, just because all of those tools or all of those applications are, as you said, I mean, basically, at least us, everything is kind of computer-wise, everything is AI, everything is machine learning. So doesn't I mean, I understand where the kind of the questions coming from. A global device ID, there are companies that claim to have that. I'm not sure if it's really kind of even something that you can apply in a solution like ours. I mean, I just want to mention something very important, just because we are a European company, right? I understand or appreciate not everyone here is Europe and then have this lovely GDPR and all of those things. So what Bugaroo is doing, and I believe any other vendor in our industry, is we are not looking at the real users. So we obviously will alert our customers and say, okay, this user, coming from this device, he is currently in country B, he is roaming, is he have issues with his device, as I said. I gave enough examples, I think. But we wouldn't be able to say this user is, this is his username, or this is account number, sort code, or branch number, depends on the territory. So to that end, it is almost impossible to basically look at one device that accesses bank A and say, you know what, it's the same user that accessing now bank B. And I appreciate there are claims that we could do that. We can, sometimes you could, but then you need to get yourself into the cookies world and all of those things that, again, it's another layer of sensitivity, at least in Europe. So I don't really, as I said, I don't really see that as a disadvantage for a smaller organization. At least that's not what our customer are telling us. It's probably the other way. I mean, there are a lot of advantages to smaller organizations. And, I work for larger organizations to medium organizations and smaller organizations. So it's,
Yeah, okay. The other one I've got here is, can your solution be used for securing payments to comply with 3DS 2.0?
Okay. Yes. I mean, because, again, it depends what you think of when you say securing payment. And it's probably a question from the UK, where regulation is coming closer than other territories in Europe, where you basically need the second factor authentication for every kind of payment or authorization that you go through. And yeah, I mean, essentially, the way to look at that is, so you have this screen, this 3D secure authentication page, right, where you could basically apply Bugaroo, and then we will then maintain this behavioral profile and everything we are keep discussing for the last 40 minutes, and you can also see it there. And then we'll see, okay, this individual, is it who we say there? Is that the device that he's usually using in order to go through this payment? Is he have any problem with his device? Have we seen the same device being used in the last, I don't know, 2 hours for 5 different payments? Things like that. So that's and yeah, we are doing some pilots with that as we speak, and it's going quite well, I'm happy to say. And also, I will just add, the same approach could be also applied to open channel or open banking. Sorry.
Open banking, yeah, PSD2.
Yeah, because PSD2 again, European, because that's where we are, both of us now. Yeah. But it's a good concept. I mean, and essentially the problem there, if for open banking, if someone doesn't know what it means, so there is going to be another channel now. So someone will have another kind of aggregator that will have different accounts. I think in the US, they call it Mint or something like that. And it used to be with kind of screen scraping, etc. Nowadays, it will be more formalized. There's going to be an API. Problem is, for fraud prevention vendors, is there's not going to be a lot of data.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the same approach. I mean, you always need to authenticate yourself for the first time. And I think every week or 2, something like that. And then that this is an authenticated user. At that point of authentication, we will then execute our stuff, and we will see then, everything that I keep saying, and then basically providing risk level or indications there are some issues.
Okay, excellent. That seems to be all the questions we have. I found that really interesting. I hope everybody else on the call has as well. Thank you, Asaf.
Thank you, Gareth. Pleasure.
Yeah, as I say, this is the first in a series of 3 fraud talks. The next one will be on the 13th of August, where I'll be joined by a guest from IBM Safer Payments and talking about payment fraud, card fraud, and new payment methods in open banking. Following this webinar, we will be sending out some more information on Bugaroo and on Sionic and our fraud offering as Sionic. And I thank you all for joining. And if you have any feedback, please feel free to get in touch with myself, and I can direct you to Bugaroo as well. Or you can contact Bugaroo directly through their website. Thank you very much. Thank you, Asaf.
Thank you, Gareth. Well, nice to be here. Bye-bye.